From a contest winner who became a pig-faced minion to Evil-Lyn's 45-pound costume causing actual bruising, the 1987 Masters of the Universe production was filled with bizarre budget disasters, unexpected casting stories, and production chaos that would make even Skeletor's schemes seem simple. This cult classic's behind-the-scenes drama rivals anything from Castle Grayskull itself. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Masters of the Universe. Fact 1. A fan contest winner became Skeletor's pig minion. In 1986, Mattel launched a promotional contest that would give one lucky young fan the chance to appear in the upcoming Masters of the Universe movie. The prize seemed like every child's dream come true, a real role in a Hollywood film based on their favorite toy line. Richard Sponder, a young boy from Illinois, entered the contest by sending in just one entry form after his mother gave him a single stamp, telling him that was all he could use. When Richard won the contest, Mattel contacted his family with exciting news, but there was a problem that nobody had anticipated. By the time all the legal paperwork was completed and Richard arrived on set in California, director Gary Goddard had already finished filming all the scenes that took place on Earth. The original plan had been to give Richard a small walk-on role in one of the high school scenes, but those sequences were already in the can. Faced with this scheduling nightmare, Goddard had to get creative. He decided to cast the contest winner as a completely new character that would appear in the Eternia scenes that were still being filmed. Richard was transformed into a grotesque pig-faced creature called Pig Boy, one of Skeletor's evil minions lurking in the shadows of Castle Grayskull. The character's official name in the production notes was actually Matashai, though this name never appears in the film itself. Richard's big moment comes when Skeletor returns to Castle Grayskull from Earth, and Pig Boy silently hands the villain his staff in a brief but memorable scene. The young actor spent just one evening filming his scenes, but the experience included a full Hollywood treatment with makeup, costume fittings, and meals in the studio cafeteria alongside the main cast. Richard even got to keep his elaborate pig mask and costume as a souvenir, and Mattel surprised him on set with boxes full of action figures from the toy line. Fact 2. Evil-Lyn's costume was a 45-pound torture device. Actress Meg Foster faced one of the most physically demanding costume challenges in science fiction film history when she suited up as Evil-Lyn in Masters of the Universe. The complete Evil-Lyn ensemble weighed a staggering 45 pounds, making it one of the heaviest costumes ever worn by an actress in a fantasy film. The centerpiece of this elaborate outfit was a solid fiberglass breastplate that formed the foundation of Evil-Lyn's intimidating warrior look, but this rigid piece of armor came with serious consequences for the performer wearing it. The weight and design of the costume caused Foster to suffer severe bruising around her groin area throughout the filming process. The heavy fiberglass components pressed against her body for hours during long shooting days, creating painful pressure points that left visible marks. Even more challenging was the costume's incredibly restrictive design, which limited Foster's range of movement so dramatically that she was physically unable to sit down while wearing it. This meant that during breaks between takes, Foster had to remain standing or find creative ways to rest without bending at the waist. Despite these painful limitations, Foster found a silver lining in her uncomfortable situation. She later credited the awkward and immobile nature of the costume with actually helping her stay in character as the cold and calculating Evil-Lyn. The rigid posture forced upon her by the heavy armor contributed to Evil-Lyn's signature stance and movements, giving the character a distinctive physical presence that matched her stern personality. The costume's design also informed the way Foster carried herself throughout her scenes, creating an air of authority and menace that became central to her portrayal. The practical challenges of the Evil-Lyn costume explain why the character is never seen sitting down during any scene in the movie, a detail that most viewers probably never noticed, but was actually a necessity due to the physical limitations of Foster's elaborate armor. Fact 3. Production shut down 3 days early. Masters of the Universe came dangerously close to never reaching theaters when Canon Films made the shocking decision to shut down production 3 days before the scheduled completion date. The studio had been struggling financially throughout the filming process, and the mounting costs of their most expensive production ever finally forced executives to pull the plug on the entire operation. This abrupt shutdown left the film in a devastating state, with the most important scenes still unfinished and sitting in limbo. The timing of this production halt could not have been worse, as the climactic battle between He-Man and Skeletor had not yet been filmed. Without this crucial finale, the movie would have been completely unusable, representing a total loss of the millions of dollars already invested in the project. The cast and crew found themselves in an impossible situation, watching helplessly as their months of hard work appeared destined for the trash bin due to Canon's financial collapse. Director Gary Goddard refused to accept this outcome and launched a desperate campaign to convince the studio executives to allow him to finish the film. He pleaded with Canon Films to provide just enough funding for one additional day of shooting, arguing that they could complete the essential scenes needed to make the movie releasable. Goddard's persistence eventually paid off when the studio agreed to scrape together the bare minimum resources necessary for this final push. The rescue shooting took place under extremely limited conditions, with only the most essential cast members present and a skeleton crew operating the cameras and lights. Dolph Lundgren and Langella showed up to film their final confrontation with minimal support staff, working quickly to capture the footage that would save the entire production. This last-minute scramble to finish the movie explains why some of the final scenes feel rushed, and why certain planned sequences had to be simplified or abandoned entirely due to the severe time and budget constraints. Fact 4. The final battle had no lights, due to budget cuts. One of the most dramatic moments in Masters of the Universe occurs when He-Man and Skeletor's swords clash during their final battle, creating a powerful energy surge that suddenly plunges the entire chamber into darkness. Audiences watching the film naturally assumed this darkness was an intentional special effect designed to showcase the immense power of these two legendary warriors locked in combat, but the real story behind this scene reveals a much more mundane and desperate situation. The truth is that Canon Films had become so financially strapped during production that they began dismantling and removing sets before filming was actually completed, regardless of whether those sets were still needed for upcoming scenes. When the time came to shoot the climactic sword fight between the two main characters, the production team discovered that much of the elaborate Castle Grayskull set had already been torn down and carted away to save money on storage and rental fees. With major portions of their carefully constructed set now missing, the filmmakers found themselves in an impossible position. They needed to complete this crucial scene, but they no longer had the full set or proper lighting equipment that had been designed to illuminate the grand finale. Rather than admit defeat or attempt to rebuild what had been lost, director Gary Goddard and his crew made the creative decision to embrace their limitations and work with what they had left. The solution was surprisingly simple. They turned off most of the remaining lights and shot the scene in near total darkness, using the minimal lighting equipment that was still available to create dramatic shadows and silhouettes. This forced creative choice actually ended up working in the film's favor, as the darkness added an air of mystery and intensity to the final confrontation. What could have been a production disaster instead became one of the movie's most visually striking moments, proving that sometimes the best special effects come from pure necessity rather than elaborate planning. Fact 5. Dolph Lundgren couldn't find a stunt double. Dolph Lundgren's casting as He-Man created an unexpected problem for the Masters of the Universe production team when they discovered that finding a suitable stunt double for the Swedish actor was virtually impossible. Standing at 6 feet 5 inches tall and possessing what many described as an impossibly muscular physique, Lundgren had achieved a level of physical development that made him genuinely unique in Hollywood at the time. His combination of extreme height and massive muscle mass meant that there simply weren't other actors or stunt performers who could convincingly stand in for him during action sequences. The challenge went beyond just finding someone tall enough to match Lundgren's towering frame. His physique was so distinctively built and proportioned that even other bodybuilders and athletes who might have been close to his height looked noticeably different when placed side by side with the actor. The production team scoured stunt performer databases and contacted bodybuilding communities, but they couldn't locate anyone who possessed both the necessary height and the specific muscle development that would allow them to pass as He-Man in wide shots or distant action scenes. This casting limitation forced the production to rely much more heavily on Lundgren himself for the physical demands of the role than they had originally planned. Instead of using doubles for dangerous or physically demanding sequences, Lundgren had to perform many of his own stunts and action scenes, which added both authenticity and risk to the filming process. The Swedish actor's background in martial arts and his impressive physical conditioning helped him handle these requirements, but it also meant that the production schedule had to be more carefully managed around his availability and physical limits. The inability to find a convincing double also influenced how certain action sequences were filmed and choreographed. Directors had to be more creative with camera angles and editing to create the illusion of elaborate stunts without actually putting their irreplaceable leading man in serious danger during the more complex action moments. Fact 6. The director had to pay for the ending himself. Director Gary Goddard found himself in an unprecedented situation when Canon Films completely ran out of money to finish Masters of the Universe, forcing him to make a decision that few filmmakers have ever faced: pay for the movie's ending out of his own pocket, or watch the entire project collapse. When the studio informed him that there was absolutely no more funding available to complete the crucial final battle scene between He-Man and Skeletor, Goddard realized that months of work and millions of dollars would be completely wasted if he didn't take drastic action. Faced with this impossible choice, Goddard decided to personally finance the filming of the climactic showdown that would determine whether the movie could even be released. Using his own savings and credit, the director managed to scrape together enough money to rent the basic equipment needed for one final day of shooting. This personal investment was a huge financial risk for Goddard, as there was no guarantee that Canon Films would ever be able to repay him or that the completed movie would earn enough money to justify his sacrifice. The conditions under which this final scene was filmed were extremely bare bones compared to the rest of the production. Only the most essential crew members were present, creating what could literally be called a skeleton crew for this desperate final push. Dolph Lundgren and Frank Langella showed up to perform their characters' ultimate confrontation with minimal support staff operating the cameras and basic lighting equipment that Goddard had managed to afford. The entire final battle sequence was completed in just one day under these severely limited conditions, with everyone involved understanding that this was truly their last chance to save the film. Goddard's willingness to risk his own money to finish the movie demonstrated an extraordinary level of commitment to the project and ensured that audiences would eventually get to see the conclusion of He-Man's story, even though it came at great personal cost to the director. Fact 7. Frank Langella took the role for his 4-year-old son. Frank Langella's decision to play Skeletor in Masters of the Universe had nothing to do with career ambitions or artistic challenges, and everything to do with making his 4-year-old son incredibly happy. The Academy Award-nominated actor, known for his serious dramatic roles in films like Dracula and later Frost Nixon, found himself constantly entertained by his young son's obsession with the He-Man cartoon series and toy line. The little boy would run around their house wielding plastic swords and shouting He-Man's famous battle cry, "By the power of Grayskull," at the top of his lungs. When Langella was offered the role of Skeletor, he didn't hesitate for a moment before accepting, telling interviewers that he didn't even blink when the opportunity arose. The chance to play his son's favorite villain was simply too perfect to pass up, and Langella knew that appearing in a He-Man movie would make him the coolest dad in the world from his child's perspective. The actor later said that hearing his son's excitement about the casting was worth more to him than any critical acclaim he might receive for more prestigious projects. Langella threw himself into the role with surprising enthusiasm, working hard to make Skeletor as exciting and memorable as possible for young audiences like his son. He even contributed to the character's dialogue, writing some of Skeletor's most memorable lines himself, including the haunting question he poses to He-Man. "Tell me about the loneliness of good, He-Man. Is it equal to the loneliness of evil?" This personal investment in the character helped create one of the film's most praised performances. Years later, Langella would go on record stating that playing Skeletor remained one of his favorite roles throughout his entire career. The joy of making his son proud and the fun he had embracing such an over-the-top villainous character made the experience unforgettable, proving that sometimes the most meaningful projects come from the heart rather than professional considerations. Fact 8. The film was secretly inspired by Jack Kirby's New Gods. Director Gary Goddard harbored a secret inspiration for Masters of the Universe that had nothing to do with the original He-Man cartoon or toy line, drawing instead from legendary comic book artist Jack Kirby's Fourth World Saga and his cosmic New Gods characters. Goddard was a huge fan of Kirby's epic space opera comics from the 1970s, which featured the eternal battle between the forces of good and evil across multiple planets and dimensions. The director saw an opportunity to bring this grand cosmic mythology to life, using the Masters of the Universe framework as his vehicle. The parallels between the two properties were surprisingly strong once Goddard began mapping them out. Skeletor served as the perfect stand-in for Darkseid, Kirby's ultimate villain who seeks to control the universe through sheer force and manipulation. The sorceress took on the role of the High Father, the wise leader of the good forces, while other characters were reimagined to fit into Kirby's cosmic hierarchy. Even Gwildor, the dwarf-like inventor character, was designed to echo Metron, the new god's master of technology and interdimensional travel. Goddard's enthusiasm for this concept led him to make an ambitious attempt to bring Jack Kirby himself onto the production as the film's production designer. Having Kirby create the visual look of the movie would have been a dream come true for the director, and would have given the film an authentically cosmic scope that matched his vision. Unfortunately, the studio executives at Cannon Films rejected this proposal, likely due to budget concerns and their lack of familiarity with Kirby's work in the comic book world. Comic book writer and artist John Byrne later noticed these connections and praised the film as the best New Gods movie ever made, even though it was officially a Masters of the Universe adaptation. Goddard confirmed this interpretation in letters to comic book publications, acknowledging that while he tried to make a legitimate He-Man film, his love for Kirby's cosmic mythology heavily influenced the final result. Fact 9. Skeletor's troops are robots because He-Man can't kill. The army of faceless, armored soldiers that serve Skeletor throughout Masters of the Universe weren't originally intended to be robots, but Mattel's strict moral guidelines for their flagship character forced the filmmakers to make this crucial design change early in production. The toy company was extremely protective of He-Man's heroic image and insisted that the character could never be shown killing anyone on screen, even villains who clearly deserved it. This created a significant problem for director Gary Goddard and his team, who needed to create exciting action sequences where the hero could fight large numbers of enemies without violating Mattel's ethical restrictions. The solution was both clever and practical: transform all of Skeletor's foot soldiers into mechanical beings rather than living creatures. By making them robots, the filmmakers could show He-Man destroying them in combat without any moral implications, since he would technically be dismantling machines rather than taking lives. This creative workaround allowed the movie to feature the kind of large-scale battle scenes that audiences expected from an action-adventure film, while keeping the characters' hands clean from a moral standpoint. The robotic nature of Skeletor's army also solved several practical production problems beyond the moral concerns. Robot soldiers didn't need individual personalities, distinctive looks, or speaking roles, which kept the budget and complexity of the production manageable. The uniform design of the mechanical troops made it easier to create multiple costumes and allowed stunt performers to move and fight in ways that might have seemed unnatural for human characters. Mattel's control over He-Man's moral behavior extended beyond just the killing restriction. The company initially insisted that the character couldn't engage in any morally questionable activities, including swearing or showing excessive anger. However, as toy sales began to decline during production, Mattel relaxed some of these rules and allowed director Gary Goddard more creative freedom with the character, though the robot soldier concept remained in place throughout filming. Fact 10. The sequel's sets were recycled into a Van Damme movie. When Cannon Films announced Masters of the Universe 2 at the 1987 Cannes Film Festival, the studio had already begun building elaborate sets and creating costumes for what they hoped would be their next big franchise installment. The sequel was planned to have a budget of just $2 million, and director Albert Pyun was attached to helm the project, with surfer Laird Hamilton cast as the new He-Man after Dolph Lundgren refused to return to the role. However, Cannon's financial troubles following the box office failures of both the original Masters film and Superman 4 meant that the company couldn't afford to pay Mattel the required royalties for using the He-Man characters. When Mattel pulled the plug on the sequel due to their dissatisfaction with the script and Cannon's inability to meet their financial obligations, the studio found itself in possession of expensive sets, costumes, and props that had already been constructed for a movie that would never be made. Rather than write off these assets as a complete loss, Cannon decided to salvage their investment by repurposing everything for a completely different project that wouldn't require any licensing fees or character permissions. The solution came in the form of Cyborg, a low-budget cyberpunk action film starring Jean-Claude Van Damme that was rushed into production in 1989. Director Albert Pyun, who had originally been attached to the Masters sequel, was kept on to direct this new project, and the futuristic sets that had been designed for He-Man's return to Earth worked surprisingly well for a post-apocalyptic science fiction story. The costumes and props were also modified to fit the new film's aesthetic, giving Cyborg a production value that far exceeded its modest budget. Interestingly, some television stations have occasionally broadcast Cyborg under the alternate title Masters of the Universe 2. Cyborg, creating confusion among viewers who might expect to see He-Man and Skeletor rather than Van Damme fighting robots in a wasteland setting. Fact 11. Dolph Lundgren called the shoot a nightmare. Despite appearing to be the perfect physical embodiment of He-Man with his towering height and massive muscular build, Dolph Lundgren had an absolutely miserable experience making Masters of the Universe and didn't hesitate to express his feelings about the production. In interviews with French magazines, the Swedish actor bluntly described working on the film as a nightmare, revealing that what looked like a dream role on paper turned into one of the most grueling and unpleasant shoots of his career. The combination of production problems, budget constraints, and extremely demanding working conditions made the entire experience far more challenging than Lundgren had anticipated when he signed on to play the iconic hero. The filming schedule itself was punishing, stretching across 5 long months of continuous work that tested the endurance of the entire cast and crew. Perhaps most difficult for Lundgren was the fact that 2 full months of this marathon shoot consisted entirely of night filming, which completely disrupted his sleep schedule and natural body rhythms. Working through the night for weeks on end while wearing heavy costumes and performing physically demanding action sequences took a serious toll on the actor's health and mental state. Lundgren's dissatisfaction with the production became so intense that when Cannon Films approached him about reprising his role in a planned sequel, he immediately turned down the offer without any hesitation. What made this rejection even more telling was that the studio made their sequel pitch while the original film was still being shot, meaning Lundgren was so fed up with the experience that he refused to consider returning even before the first movie was completed. Years later, Lundgren would go on record stating that playing He-Man was his lowest point as an actor, making it clear that the physical demands and production chaos had left lasting negative memories. Instead of continuing with Masters of the Universe 2, he chose to star in Cannon's Red Scorpion, preferring any other project over returning to Eternia. Fact 12. Buildings in the film were destroyed by real earthquake. Many of the downtown buildings that appear in Masters of the Universe as backdrops for the Earth-based scenes met a tragic fate just months after filming wrapped, when they were destroyed by a real natural disaster that struck Southern California. The Whittier Narrows earthquake hit the region in October of 1987, causing significant damage to numerous structures throughout the Los Angeles area, including several buildings that movie audiences had recently seen on the big screen during He-Man's adventures on Earth. The earthquake occurred only a few months after the film's August release, creating an eerie situation where viewers could watch scenes featuring buildings that no longer existed in the real world. This gave the movie an unintentional historical significance, as it became an accidental record of architectural landmarks that were lost forever when the seismic event struck. The timing was particularly striking because the film had just finished its theatrical run when the earthquake destroyed these recognizable locations. Most of the Earth-based scenes in Masters of the Universe were filmed in Whittier, California, which was directly affected by the earthquake that would later bear the city's name. The production had chosen this location for practical reasons, as it provided the kind of small-town American setting that the filmmakers wanted for the scenes where He-Man and his friends interact with the teenage characters, played by Courtney Cox and Robert Duncan McNeil. The downtown area offered a perfect backdrop for the music store battle and other key sequences that take place during the hero's time on Earth. The destruction of these filming locations created a unique piece of movie trivia that connects Masters of the Universe to a real historical event. Fans watching the film today are essentially viewing a time capsule that preserves the appearance of buildings and streetscapes that were wiped out by natural forces shortly after the cameras stopped rolling, making these scenes an unintended documentary record of a lost piece of California's architectural history. Fact 13. The post-credits scene teased a sequel that never happened. Masters of the Universe was actually ahead of its time when it came to using post-credits scenes to tease future installments, employing this now common technique decades before Marvel Studios made it a standard practice in superhero films. After the final credits finish rolling and most moviegoers would have already left the theater, Skeletor's skull-faced head suddenly emerges from the watery pit where He-Man had apparently sent him to his death during their climactic battle. The villain looks directly at the camera and delivers the iconic line, "I'll be back," in a clear reference to Arnold Schwarzenegger's famous Terminator catchphrase, breaking the fourth wall, to promise audiences that his story wasn't finished. This bold marketing move was designed to generate excitement for Masters of the Universe 2, which Cannon Films had already announced at the 1987 Cannes Film Festival before the first movie was even released. The studio was so confident in their franchise potential that they were publicly promising a sequel while still working to complete the original film, and the post-credits scene served as their way of guaranteeing to audiences that Skeletor would return for another epic confrontation with He-Man. Unfortunately, the sequel that this scene promised would never come to pass due to Cannon Films' rapidly deteriorating financial situation. The combination of Masters of the Universe's poor box office performance and the studio's other expensive failures like Superman 4 created a financial crisis that made it impossible for Cannon to fund any major productions. Even though sets had been built and preliminary work had begun on the sequel, the company's bankruptcy forced them to abandon the project entirely. The post-credits scene remains as a fascinating piece of film history, representing one of the earliest examples of this now ubiquitous marketing technique, while also serving as a reminder of Hollywood's unpredictable nature, where even the most confident promises of future adventures can disappear due to circumstances beyond the filmmaker's control. Fact 14. They planned to film Spider-Man with the same sets. Cannon Films had developed an elaborate and ambitious plan to maximize their investment in superhero properties by creating a shared production strategy that would have connected Masters of the Universe, Superman 4, and a planned Spider-Man movie through clever budget management and set reuse. The studio's original scheme involved taking the money that had been allocated for their Spider-Man film and splitting it between two other superhero projects, with the intention of using the combined profits from both movies to fund a much larger and more spectacular Spider-Man production than they could have afforded with the original budget alone. The plan specifically called for Masters of the Universe and Superman 4. The quest for peace to serve as stepping stones toward the ultimate goal of bringing Spider-Man to the big screen in a way that would compete with other major studio superhero films. Cannon executives believed that by making two moderately successful superhero movies first, they could generate enough revenue and industry credibility to justify a significantly increased budget for their web-slinging hero, who they saw as having the greatest commercial potential of all their licensed properties. The high school sets that were constructed for the Earth-based scenes in Masters of the Universe were specifically designed with this future Spider-Man project in mind. Director Albert Pyun, who was attached to helm the Spider-Man film, had already planned to reuse these same high school locations for Peter Parker's scenes, which would have provided significant cost savings and allowed more of the budget to be spent on special effects and action sequences involving the character's web-swinging abilities. Unfortunately, this elaborate multi-movie strategy collapsed completely when both Masters of the Universe and Superman 4 performed poorly at the box office, generating nowhere near the profits that Cannon had projected. The financial losses from these two expensive productions, combined with the studio's other mounting debts, made it impossible for Cannon to move forward with any version of their Spider-Man project, leaving the character's film rights to eventually revert to other studios. Fact 15. Musicians strike forced international orchestra recording. Composer Bill Conti faced an unexpected challenge when creating the musical score for Masters of the Universe due to a musicians' strike that was taking place in Hollywood during the film's post-production period. Conti, who had previously composed memorable soundtracks for major films like Rocky and The Karate Kid, found himself unable to work with the usual Los Angeles-based orchestras and recording studios that he would normally rely on for a project of this scale. The strike created a serious time crunch for the production, as the film needed its musical score completed on schedule to meet its theatrical release date, regardless of the labor disputes affecting the local music industry. To solve this problem, Conti was forced to take his musical arrangements overseas and record the soundtrack using various European orchestras in different countries, working with multiple conductors who each brought their own interpretation and style to the music. This unconventional approach meant that different sections of the score were recorded in completely separate sessions, with different musicians, different recording equipment, and different acoustic environments, all of which contributed to noticeable variations in the sound quality and musical consistency throughout the final soundtrack. The fragmented recording process created significant challenges for maintaining a unified musical vision across the entire film. As Conti himself later explained, "We didn't have anything that went from beginning to end without a problem. referring to the constant obstacles and complications that arose from trying to coordinate multiple recording sessions across different European locations. The composer had to adapt his working methods to accommodate the limitations imposed by this scattered approach, often having to revise and rearrange sections of the score based on what each particular orchestra was capable of delivering. Despite these production difficulties, the Masters of the Universe soundtrack has gained recognition among fans over the years, with many comparing its epic, orchestral style to the musical scores of Superman and Star Wars, proving that Conti's determination to overcome the strike-related obstacles ultimately resulted in a memorable musical accompaniment to the film.